Fury Warrior with Slayer in Season 3 is extremely fast-paced. It's fast, simple, and it hits like a truck in Mythic Plus. Fury is one of the easiest specs to pick up this season. You're always pressing something, you don't have awkward gaps, and the build we're running is the same one top players are pushing into high keys right now. You don't bring Bloodlust or a Battle Res, but what you do bring is Battle Shout, which is a 5% attack power buff that every physical comp wants. The only real downside is the target cap. Most of your AoE is limited to 5 targets, and that's kind of a meme at this point, but in practice, it doesn't stop you from pumping huge damage. On the screen, you'll see the build I'm using. The spec tree is basically locked in. There isn't much room to move things around. The only small choice you might see here is between fresh meat and improved bloodthirst, but honestly, either one of them is great here, and because in this setup, we're basically trying to avoid pressing bloodthirst. It used to be an important button, but with the Slayer hero talents in Season 3, it's filler at best. Now the class tree, you've got a way more freedom, but still not a lot of it. You can grab movement speed with fast footwork, or you can swap it out for Rumbling Earth if you want a better shockwave. Honed Reflexes gives you a little cooldown reduction on things like Pummel and Enrage Regeneration. Concussive Blows is actually kind of fun because it lowers your interrupt button and it gives you a 5% damage buff on that target every time you kick it. Or you could take Seismic Reverberation, which makes Whirlwind hit an extra time if you hit 3 or more targets, which is pretty solid for Mythic Plus. So overall, this build is the one people are using in 19 plus keys and even higher, so you know it's pretty good. And now let's talk about Slayer. Slayer is what defines Fury in Season 3, and if you don't understand how it works, the rotation will feel like just button mashing, so let's break it down. The core mechanic is Slayer's dominance. Every time you attack the main target, you have a high chance to trigger Slayer's strike. It does a little bit of damage and also applies a debuff called Marked for Execution. Remember that. We will also refer to it as MFE for short. MFE stacks up to 3 times, and each stack makes your next execute on that target deal more damage. So right away you can see the flow. You attack, you get Slayer strikes, those Slayer strikes mark the target, and then you hit it with a big juicy execute. Now here is where it gets interesting. When you consume MFE by executing the target, the talent Unrelenting Assault kicks in. This does 2 things. First, it reduces Blade Storm's cooldown by 5 seconds, and second, it applies 2 stacks of Overwhelmed per MFE stack consumed. So if you execute with 3 stacks of MFE, you're shaving off 15 seconds off of Blade Storm, and on top of that, you're applying 6 stacks of Overwhelm in 1 hit. That's huge. Overwhelmed is the debuff that makes enemies take more damage from you, 1% per stack up to 10. And Blade Storm itself has 2 major jobs in Slayer. First, Overwhelmed Blades makes every strike of Blade Storm apply Overwhelmed to all enemies it hits. And second, because of Imminent Demise, every 3 Slayer strikes you generate gives you a sudden death proc, which just means you can execute the target regardless of its current health. And if you spend sudden death, your next Blade Storm strikes an extra 1 time up to 3 extra swings. It doesn't extend the duration of Blade Storm, it just makes Blade Storm tick faster, which means more Overwhelmed stacks go out in the same window. Now let's connect all of this with the Season 3 tier set, because they're built to work together. The 2-piece set bonus makes your execute hit 10% harder. More importantly, when sudden death procs, that execute can trigger Slayer Strike based on how many Overwhelmed stacks are on the target, feeding the Marked for Execution cycle. The 4-piece bonus makes Raging Blow hit 10% harder, and every Raging Blow you press has a chance, based on the number of Overwhelmed stacks on the target, to trigger Reap the Storm at 150% strength. Reap the Storm is the Slayer passive that makes Bloodthirst sometimes unleash a cleaving strike and apply Overwhelmed. With the tier set, Raging Blow is now the button condition that actually drives this effect. So now that we've gotten the basics and how the logic of the spec works, we'll start with explaining the single target rotation. When you're fighting a single target, the first thing to keep in mind is your cooldowns. Recklessness and Avatar should always be used as often as possible, and Bladestorm should go right after you've gotten yourself enraged, so the whole spin actually benefits from it. Anger management is what ties this all together. Every bit of rage you spend brings those big buttons much faster, so the quicker you cycle, the more often you get to press them. And Thunderous Roar technically has a spot here too, but in pure single target, it's not very exciting. You would use it after you have nothing else to hit, so don't let it push out of anything more valuable. After your cooldowns, Rampage is your main priority. It's the ability that spends rage, keeps enrage rolling, and fuels anger management. But Rampage isn't always something you slam instantly. If you don't have enrage, then yes, you press Rampage immediately. But if you're already enraged and you're not about to cap rage soon, you can hold off for a moment and let yourself build a little higher before pressing it. Pulling past 100 rage lets you refresh enrage later and still benefit from anger management without wasting anything. Now execute is where things get a little trickier. It's not a button you just hit whenever it lights up. The real value comes from the Slayer talents. If you've built up marked for execution stacks, that's when execute shoots up in priority. Once you've hit 2 or more stacks, then you spend it. Sudden Death adds another layer on top of it. It can stack up to 2 charges of it, and while you don't need to press execute right away at 1 charge of Sudden Death, you can't afford to let it sit at 2. That's your safety valve. If you're capped at 2 charges, you spend 1 so you don't waste future procs. Ideally, you line it up with marked for execution for extra value, but if Sudden Death stacks up too high, you just spend your executes right away so you don't lose out. And below 20% health, execute gets added to the mix more often, but even then, unless you've got marked for execution stacks for 2 or more, it's still not higher priority than your other core buttons. Bladestorm also sets up another special window. As soon as it ends, you can shift into spamming Raging Blow. Each Raging Blow stacks up an effect called Slaughtering Strikes, making your next Rampage hit that much harder. You want to pile up as many of those stacks as you can before spending Rampage again, and you can stack it up to 5 times. And once all those special conditions are handled, the rest of the rotation falls into place kinda naturally. Rampage is there to keep enrage rolling, Raging Blow whenever it's available, execute when you have stacks of marked for execution or Sudden Death, Bloodthirst only if nothing else is available, Thunderous Roar is even lower than that, and Whirlwind is even you don't have anything. It's the last possible filler if you've got really nothing else. I want to note that tracking all those execute conditions can get a little overwhelming. So if you want to make your life easier, there is a WeakAura out there that gives you clear alerts whenever you hit those execute windows. It's not mandatory, but it makes your life that much easier and it saves you from missing value. Now that we understand the single target priority, we can switch to AoE. The nice thing about Fury in AoE is that you don't really need to relearn anything. Your single target rotation already carries out almost 1-to-1. The only real changes are a couple of abilities that shift in priority once you're hitting multiple targets. The first one is Whirlwind. With improved Whirlwind, every time you press it, your next 4 single target abilities cleave up to 5 enemies. That means Rampage, Raging Blow, and Execute all cleave around the pack. If you don't keep that buff rolling, you're basically just doing single target damage onto the group, and that's a massive DPS loss. So in AoE, weaving Whirlwind is non-negotiable. It's what turns your whole rotation into actual cleave. The second big change is Thunderous Roar. In single target, it sucks. Roar is at the bottom of the list, but in AoE, it jumps all the way up because it spreads a bleed to everyone it hits. The important part is that you want to be enraged before you press it, because that bleed snapshots enrage. That way, every single tick is buffed, and on a big pool, that bleeds adds up fast. Everything else stays the same. Rampage is still there to keep enrage up, Execute still follows the same rules we already covered for like Marked for Execution and Sudden Death. Bloodthirst is still just a filler, and the only real new habits you're keeping is Whirlwind and making sure you roar while enraged. And don't forget to respect how much Raging Blow does for you with this build. Beyond that, you're playing the exact same rotation. Before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about stats, because this is something that always comes up. The first rule is simple. Higher item level almost always wins. More strength and stamina from raw item level will usually outweigh a perfect stat spread for like a lower level piece. That said, if you're wondering about secondary stats, the general guideline for Fury with Slayer in Season 3 is Mastery first, then Haste, then Versatility, and finally Crit is at the bottom. But, and this part is important, you should always sim your goddamn character. Raidbots.com will tell you exactly which enchants, gems, trinkets, and gear combos gives you the most DPS for your setup. Think of a stat priority as a broad starting point, and then let the sims fine-tune the details. I'll drop the build link and the Execute WeakAura down in the description if you want to copy this setup or make your life a little easier. If you've got any questions, leave a comment down below and I'll help you out. And if you find this guide helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more World of Warcraft guides just like this one. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.